So on the SC-12 and the MST-14, we have two different settings for bead offset. So that is kind of confusing. Let's discuss those real quick. So the first setting is the deep setup. Hopefully you only have to set this up once and adjust periodically. But we take into account the position of the bead guns on the carriage. And really this is actually where the material falls or hits the ground, not necessarily where it's mounted, because the fall path is not going to be straight down on beads usually. So I'll show you a quick example of that here. So in this graphic, you can see that an air duster here. Here's a couple paint guns, and then here's a beater. That material fall path will actually extend backwards. What we want to take into account is where each of these materials actually hit the surface. And so offsets are all going to be relative to one another. You can base it off of the air duster, although that isn't as relative. I usually base it off of the first paint gun. And I'll measure backwards. I'm basically saying beads will hit the ground 13 inches behind where the first material hits the ground. So that way we can take into account where beads will actually hit the ground and get things dialed in. So here we've got 13 inches set up. I can also take into account the responsiveness of bead guns, because beads take incredibly long time to actually hit the ground in terms of electronics and how electronic processing goes. So I mean, it can take over 100 milliseconds for beads to hit the ground. What that means is to get really dialed in, we want to turn the bead guns on early, so we have a negative delay on the on. We actually want to turn them off early as well. So the responsiveness is going to be about the same. So we're going to essentially have negative 100 milliseconds on both ends. So with these two settings, we've basically taken into account where material hits the ground relative to the carriage and how long it takes material to hit the ground. And this is a combination of the solenoid responsiveness, moving the plunger, and actual fall time. Now that we've got those things set up, we really should be somewhat close to lining up on a skip on both ends. So theoretically, beads would start and end fairly spot on with the skip. Now in real life, that's not actually how things work. Variances in pressures, temperatures change a lot of things, and then if you've got any sort of wind element, that can also change things. So generally, especially with type 1 beads, we look for additional bead coverage, meaning we actually want beads to extend after the line, as well as overcover before the line. So if we're talking about a 1040 pattern, common thing I see is something like a 1 foot extend, which is actually extending that 10-foot paint pattern by 1 foot. So we have an 11-foot bead pattern now. But we want it on both ends, because if I just leave it the way it is right now, that 1 foot is acted at the end of the skip, but we want it on both ends, so we'll pull that back half a foot. So we'll see something like this, where we've got an 11-foot bead pattern, and it's split. Half a foot is going to be after the skip, half a foot is going to be before. Now, if you're going into the wind, that's gonna cause additional wind resistance. You're gonna want a larger negative offset. Now, notice how you can basically account for the wind variable with one setting. Where on the SM5, there was two settings. There's bead lead and bead lag. A lot of people really got used to this control. However, this is limiting, because usually the length of the bead pattern doesn't necessarily change. What changes is where you want that bead pattern to fall. So in my previous example, you probably still want 11 foot even going into the wind. What needs to change is where that 11 foot actually falls. Or if you're going with the wind, it's going to be the exact opposite. You're going to have a lot of bead carry in the wind, and so you're actually going to want to delay that bead pattern a little more. So we've basically taken two settings and made it one. The other problem with the SM5's lead and lag is it's distance based, and it is not going to vary the way it is on the SC-12 because we're handling the responsiveness settings. What I mean by that is 1.2 bead lead at 10 miles an hour is going to be different at 8 miles an hour. And you're going to have the same problem using these two adjustments here, which is why we have that other setting. So that is why we handle the responsiveness of the gun using delays where we previously didn't. So we have to handle time issues with the time setting and mounting issues with the mounting setting. From there, you can adjust what your actual bead pattern is if it's separate than the paint pattern, which it usually is, and then where you want that bead pattern to fall. So it seems redundant, but it's really not. In the setup menu, you're handling mounting / tilt / where the material hits the ground, and the responsiveness of the solenoid and the bead fall time. Where on that main screen, you're changing pattern length and where that pattern falls in relation to the paint. So once again, these seem very redundant, they are not. Please let us know if you have any questions.